So someone woke up from their nap. This is Piper Rain. Say hi to everyone. She has a purple mouth because of some medicine, which I will talk all about in my, not this video, but the next video. So, her birth story. It all happened really quick. Hopefully she chills out with us for a little bit. But she might get hungry, so I might have to stop it and then start again. So, it all happened really fast. I woke up on Wednesday morning and I was, I had like cramp. I didn't feel well. Like I was like, either I'm in labor or I'm gonna be sick on the toilet. So everything was just uncomfortable. Like I just had pains and I wasn't sure what they were. So I got up and went to the bathroom and had breakfast, and then like at 11:30 my mom and I went for a walk. She had gotten into town the Friday before, and my back hurt and I was having cramps, like menstrual cramps, so I had to stop a few times. Mom was like, I think you're in labor, and I was like, maybe, but I'm not gonna get my hopes up. By this point I was ready to have her out of my stomach. And so we were walking along and my back was really hurting. But you know, I was overdue, so of course my back was hurting. I came home, took a shower, and when I got out of the shower I had what I now know is a contraction. Like my legs got weak. It was so painful. And so I sat down on the toilet and I was like, whoa, it really knocked me for a loop. So at that point I was like, okay, I think labor might be starting, right? But in my mind I was like, okay, we're gonna have like days of this, like 3 days or 2 days, because this was my first baby and that's everyone else's experience had been the same, or had been that it takes days, at least the people I talked to. So we went to our monitoring appointment, which was at like 2:30 or 2 o'clock, 2:30. And, you know, I was having pretty regular, not regular, but pretty multiple times an hour, cramping. And so she hooked me up and she was like, yeah, there's some little blips here and there. So it might be something, but might not. And I was like, okay. And then got home at around 3:30 and went up to bed, and my mom made me like a grilled cheese and I ate that, and then I was in bed and then it started. And so I got up on all fours and I was just moving around, and they seemed to be coming at every 5 minutes. And I'd been told that when they're 5 minutes apart, lasting for a minute for an hour, that's when you go to the hospital. So they were 5 minutes apart, but they were only like 20 to 30 seconds long. So I was kind of like, wait, I'm confused because labor just started. Like, you know, it just started that way. Like, started for me at 5 minutes apart. And then, so I got to the bath, and we had actually redone our bathroom to have a tub that I could fit in, because we had this tiny weird tub. So I got into our brand new bath, which was lovely, and I was in there for, I don't know, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, when I was like, okay, they were getting more and more intense, and there was like no break in between them. So I was like, what is going on? So we started, you know, we were timing them, and Steve was like, they're 2 minutes apart and like 45 seconds long. And I was so confused. I was like, what do we do? Her biggie just fell. What do we do? So we called the doula, and she said, yeah, you're doing great. Give me a call when you go to the hospital. You got time. And I was like, okay. And then she said, did you call your doctor? And I said, no. So we called the doctor's office, and they said, yeah, you know, you just want to make sure it's not false labor. And at that point I turned to my mom and I was like, if this is false labor, I quit. I'm done. Knock me out. I can't do it. They were pretty intense. and 2 minutes apart. And then finally they were 2 minutes apart, lasting a minute. And I was like in the tub still. And I was like, I think this is when like, I don't know. I just feels like that's really far along. And I really don't want to give birth in this tub at home with no support, medical support. So we got to the hospital, and this is when I stopped kind of remembering things. I don't really remember getting out of the tub. I don't really remember getting dressed. I remember getting a surge on the stairs, or contraction in hypnobirthing is called a surge, on the stairs, going downstairs, and I had to stop. I remember thinking this could be dangerous, but it wasn't. And then I got to the front door, and again, I had another surge, and I remember seeing two guys walking by and thinking like, oh my God, this is like out of a movie, you know. And then we got in the car. I remember being like, oh, my pants are a little wet. So in my head, I was like, okay, I'm either peeing myself or my water's breaking. And then I remember getting into the wheelchair, and maybe a little bit of registration. Like I just remember these like snippets, like opening my eyes to like parts of a movie almost. We got into the room, and I stood up, and my water broke. And ladies, that's no joke. Like, they do not accurately depict the breaking of the waters in the movies. My pants, I had on like pajama pants, were soaked as if I had just come out of a swimming pool. Like outside, inside, all the way up to the waistband, sopping wet. It wasn't just like the inside of my pants, like I peed my pants. Like there's a lot of waters coming out when your water breaks, at least with mine. And I had been nauseous the whole time. And so then I got into bed, and like I tore off my pants. I remember seeing a panty liner in my panties and laughing, like in my head, being like, that's hilarious, because I wasn't going to hold anything. And got into bed, and I threw up 3 times because I was so nauseous. And then at that point, I think I said, this sucks. But I don't know, you're just in the throes of it, you know, and the only way through it is to go forward. So again, my memory is like really spotty on this, and we have some video, but not a lot. My mom took snippets of video, and Steve seems to remember it differently than I do, and he's probably right, because he wasn't actually giving birth. But so one point, they checked me at some point, and I was 4.5 centimeters, and it was so intense. I was like, I can't do this for 7 more hours, 6 more, 5 more hours, 4 more hours. However, I just thought it was going to take hours and hours and hours. This is at 6 p.m., by the way, by the time we get to the hospital. And so I say, I call it epidural, and I turn to Steve. I'm like, I'm sorry. I know we want to do this natural, but I can't do it. It's too painful. I can't. It's too intense. I can't do this for hours on end. And it was my back. It was all back. It was back pain. I was having back labor, and it was really painful. So, at that point, they said, okay, and I had to have a bag of fluids first. So I kept, after every contraction, I looked up at the bag of fluids and be like, is that freaking thing done yet? So once the bag of fluids came in, they called for the anesthesiologist, and she took like 45 minutes to get there, or I can't really remember if they called before the bag or what. But by the time she got there, I had done I had tried a few different positions, and so sorry, it's all really jumbled in my head. For those of you who have given birth, you understand. But at one point, I was up and out of bed, and with leaning onto the bed, like bent over. And my mom asked, so like, at what point do we know when? Oh no, so I think so by the time the anesthesiologist came, I was 8 centimeters, and I was like, oh, and then this was like literally from like 6 to 7 p.m. I went from 4.5 to 8 centimeters. That's why it was so painful and intense. I mean, it's always painful, but I think that's why I called for the epidural. I don't know. That's what I like to tell myself. So the anesthesiologist came in and was like, by the time I get this in, it might be time for you to push, and it does nothing for back labor. And you're and so I was like, oh, well, and I was 8 centimeters, and I was like, okay, well, I can do this. That's just 2 more to go. Like I thought it was just gonna be hours and hours of that pain, but once I found out I was at 8, I was like, I can do this. Yeah. So the anesthesiologist went away, and I think at that point I got out of bed because it was all back labor. And lying on your back during back labor is like the worst thing you can do. So I got out and I was like leaning there, and there's just making a mess all over the floor. I remember thinking, oh, Steve's shoes. Like the thoughts you have are so crazy when you're going through this, because he was like rubbing my back. And my mom was like, so at what point do we know that it's time for her to push? And the nurse said, oh, well, the baby's heart rate will drop and she'll feel like she needs to push. And I was like, I felt like I needed to push for the last like 15 minutes. I don't know. I was waiting for you to tell me to push. I didn't know I was supposed to say it. And so I got back in bed, and the doctor and the midwife came in. My doctor was, of course, it was the one day that week that she wasn't there, but the midwife came in and was like, yep, you're ready to go. And so they got me all prepped, and I was trying to do my hypnobirthing during the pushing. I was doing it really well during the pre-pushing phase before transition, but once I had to start pushing, there was this, when I tried to take a deep breath in, or any breath in, during the contraction, so you're just like, you're supposed to do this like J breath. I couldn't breathe in during the contraction because I would get this like intense sharp pain in my bowels, maybe. I don't know what it was, but certainly her head, this big head, was pushing on something. Hold on, sweetheart. We're almost done. You can do it. You can do it. Maybe not. All right, I'm going to go feed her, and then I'll finish the story. Okay, so she's fed and resting. Hopefully she'll let me get through this story. So anyway, I got this intense pain every time I took a breath in during the contraction. So in the end, I just ended up bearing down, which is not what you're supposed to do during hypnobirthing, but it's what felt best for my body. So I just went with it. Steve kept being like, breathe, don't forget to breathe. And I was like, I can't breathe. It hurts too much. So I just ended up bearing down. And she came out. I don't know how many pushes or how long I was pushing. I have no idea. But that ring of fire, that thing's no joke. Whew, that hurts. But you know, it doesn't last that long, and I did end up tearing up and down in 2 places. At one point, the midwife was like, "Stop, stop, stop!" But that's not really easy to do either, because the only thing that feels good is to push. And the pushing didn't hurt at all. Like when I was pushing, there's a lot of pressure, but it didn't hurt. The ring of fire hurt, but that was it. And then she popped out. That head is like the best feeling in the world. That's like the biggest relief I've ever felt in my life, was when I felt the head come out. And then the shoulders hurt a little bit, but totally it was like the best feeling. And then she was out. But then I saw she's found her voice, so you're going to hear her a lot cooing and eyeing. So I saw the midwife's face when she was born, and it looked terrified, which made me terrified for like a split second, because then I looked down and I saw that the umbilical cord was wrapped around her neck 2 times. But then Piper went or something in it, right? Like before I could eat, the panic could even send off adrenaline. And she was there, and she was with us, and it was wonderful. So I got to the hospital at 6 p.m. and she was born at 8:54 p.m. So it was really fast, really intense. And like she barely even had a cone head because she wasn't even in the birth canal long enough for her head to misshape. Anyway, so that's the birth story. After I had, I didn't want Pitocin. I had said that I don't want Pitocin post-birth, but I ended up losing a lot of blood, and I was really weak. Like they tried to get me up to go pee, and the next day, and I couldn't. Oh my goodness, you have a lot to say. You have a lot to say. So I tried to get up to pee, and I felt really sick, so I sat back down. So they ended up putting a catheter in, and then we tried one more time. No, it was that same day. It was that night, because the doula was still there. I was like, please let me try one more time before we put the catheter in, and I passed out, like standing up. I like lost consciousness, just for a second. I don't think I was standing up. I think I was like sitting down, but like leaning against the nurse. So that, so I ended up getting a catheter, and I had a lot of bleeding, and so they ended up putting me on Pitocin that night, a bag of Pitocin that night, which is just like me, like then you get contractions again, and you're just like, oh, isn't this over yet? Like, it's just like adding insult to injury. And then the next morning, the doctor came and said I was still bleeding a lot. I was on a second bag of Pitocin, and what had happened is that clots had formed, and they kind of coagulated and made like one big clot that couldn't come out. So it was preventing my uterus from contracting or like shrinking down. So I was just bleeding. And she was like, this is what happens in third world countries. Women bleed out and they die. I was like, okay. So what do we do? So she had to manually remove the clots and massage the uterus. And so she had to stick her hand up and massage the uterus. And I'm telling you, it was the most painful thing I think I've ever been through. It was so painful because you contract like as if you're giving birth again, but and her hand goes up, but you're so raw and so sore from giving birth. So it was so painful. We should do it twice. So the second when she went, so she did the first one, and I felt like a ton of, I guess, blood come out. And then she had to do it again. She was like, okay, tell me when you're ready. And I was like, I can't physically say the words because it's so painful. Like I can't do it to myself. So just do it. Just like go when you're ready because I'll never say, yeah, go ahead to that ever again. So she did it the second time, and at least I knew what to expect. So I was able to like breathe a little bit more through it, but it was so painful. And they got out 16 ounces of blood, which is like 2 cups. That's a lot of blood. So I was really anemic for weeks after birth. So they put me on another bag of Pitocin. So it's my third bag. And then finally the bleeding slowed down. And then the catheter came out finally that afternoon. And I was able to pee on my own, but to the point where like I couldn't actually make it to the toilet. I had like crazy urinary issues for a couple weeks after birth, but I'll get more into that in the next video. So that's it. And then we had our precious little girl, and we spent she gave birth that night. We spent the whole next day and pretty much the next Friday at like 2, I think we came home. So that's it. So that's my birth story. It was when she decided, she took her time coming, but when she decided to come, she came. It was pretty awesome. So yeah, so my next video I will talk about my postpartum experience, which has been the roughest part of all, like pregnancy, birth, postpartum. Postpartum was the roughest for me. So I'll get into all of that. Thanks everyone. Bye.